Good afternoon, and first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me or inviting us to participate in the discussion. I think it's good to have a regular get-together on international issues. It's a theme on which I've been working for quite a while in the Commission. It's more probably based on my previous experience that you were inviting me than my present one. I wanted to cover three themes, actually. One is on international cooperation, which is the basis for the entire work. The second is the bilateral relations, in particular on the transatlantic aspect. And the third one is indeed equivalence. And there's a fourth theme which is looming ahead of us, which is Brexit, which I will not cover at all, even it is my sort of present job to a large extent now. So the entire international activity is based on very significant international work in standard setting. In various areas with different levels of details, with different levels of engagement, with different levels of precisions, but with one element, two elements actually in common. One is, I think there is a mutual conviction and understanding by all those who participate in standard setting and international level that this is a very positive and necessary work. And the second, however, is also there's a common understanding about the limitations that this international work can have, because nobody is ready to have and subscribe entirely to what international standard setters do. Every jurisdictions want to keep some element, some degree of control on key elements of financial stability at home. And that's actually, it's a fundamentally democratic issue. No parliament is ready to give to the international standard setting bodies a blank check. So we have to accept that there is a lot of work taking place. We actually have to increase the accountability and the transparency of the international work, because that's also important. We're also pushing now to have an evaluation of what was decided and put in place in the last years. But we also have to accept that there is a balance between what can achieve at international level and how then this is implemented at regional level. And that's, to some extent, there's a delicate balance there, and it's always a moving target, if I would put it this way. We've done a lot in the past years. I think now also we're taking to try to understand how much was achieved, how it works. I think new areas are coming, and I think there are some of them are very complicated. Cybersecurity is certainly one of the one most complicated one that is expecting us for a number of reasons, in particular in international context, if you think in G20 terms, so how you do it in a global environment. But this underpins all our international activity. So we see very much the bilateral work as complementary to what happens at the international level. And when we have our bilateral discussions with the US, with Switzerland, with Canada, with Mexico, Japan, China, with Asians together, we do both look at what's happening at international level and how we're translating the international commitment into our systems, and also what are the specificities that every single system has, and what are actually the frictions and the impact on the respective industry, or the impact also in terms of compliance, or in terms of unlevel playing field. It's a complex interaction, multiple authorities in all jurisdictions actually. If you look at the European environment now, we've mushroomed, so this, us, the ESAs, ECB, SSM, SRB, with different roles. So it's we are a complex system. The US has a complex system. The UK will probably be a simpler system in the future with just two. But everywhere you have complex governance, so it's not easy to really find anything. These are complicated discussions also because these are always independent authorities with specific missions. It's very important to have good working structures that allows a good flow of information and to tackle the issues. but we shouldn't expect too much in terms of what bilateral cooperation can achieve in terms of structuring the cooperation. With the US, we have an informal forum based on exchange of letters. With Japan, we are establishing a more formal one based on the FTA. I don't think in substance the two are very different. What matters is actually the two sets of authorities meet and engage and discuss and have the ability to understand and explain, to be critical if necessary, and I think and frank. So I think it's a space to good bilateral engagement. Will it work? It's difficult actually to say. How would you assess if a regulatory cooperation is working? Normally, the best is from the number of problems you have avoided, but hard to find an indicator. But that's something that, and so also on the ability to reach to each other when you have issues. So these are sort of soft element. If you have sort of frictions which come out, in some cases are inevitable. In some cases, they are simply the consequence of decisions taken by parliament or by authorities, so you have to take it. I think we will have to, I think we should have an assessment after a few years of how the forum is working, or how the Asia Forum. We set up also a forum discussion with several Asian authorities together, also to help them address our interaction with us jointly. And I know that the US colleagues also have regular meetings with all the Asians together, precisely because regionally there is a lot of help by having sort of a collective approach. So we'll see how effective this cooperation will be. An element which is certainly discussed a lot in the bilateral cooperation is equivalence, obviously, which is the legal tool that the EU has to manage the complex interactions between its own system and the third country systems in its diversity, because the interaction on the cross-border issues and the way risks actually flow in and out are very diverse, and hence that's why equivalence procedures are quite diverse, because the risks appear in a quite a different in a diverse way. Our system actually allows significant deference. It is largely outcome basis. So yes, sometimes we are picky. We go, but we never go line by line until the end. Even the Swiss case, we didn't go line by line, but it was an outcome-based assessment. And yes, there was. I take that we are being criticized, but it was not completely unrelated. On the contrary, if you have an institutional framework for the resolution of disputes, this has actually an implication for the equivalence decision you're taking. And if you have ongoing negotiations, that has bearing. Very significant element of equivalence is also there is a trust component, which is very significant. Obviously, the less significant the risk, the greater the trust, and the simpler the decision, the bigger the risks. Frankly, you have to have in place, trust has to go down, because you need to have harder rules, hard controls, and significant monitoring. And we hope that with the ESA review, we will have increased monitoring and enforcement role for the ESAs. And we hope that in the ongoing files on EMIR and on investment firms, this will also be put in place in those contexts. Yes, I've saw that there is a lot of noise about the risk that the Commission could withdraw equivalence decisions without notice. We haven't almost ever done. We are aware that withdrawing decisions actually creates risks. We would do it to manage other risks, so that's a trade-off which is not necessarily easy to handle, so it depends on what type of risks. We would certainly go through a process, certainly a bilateral process, and possibly also a more open process, because frankly, there is no interest in taking markets by surprise and I don't think we have had any intention to do so. Which leads me to my final aspect on a point on equivalence, is what type of transparency, accountability. And I always thought it would benefit from being transparent, from having a clear schedule of when we would be taking decisions under which process. And at the same time, however, I noticed in these years that the third country authorities need space, need sometimes to be protected from the publicity of the discussions, because the issues they deal with are often sensitive. So we have to, there's a delicate balance to be found. And the same, I think, with Parliament. I think there's a lot of room for accountability, for us coming and explaining, both publicly or in camera. I'm not sure that adding a complex legislative process, making it slightly more complicated and transforming everything into delegated act, really adds to what today Parliament can already achieve by calling us in a more regular basis. So I don't know how much you would gain. I think the practice is more important than the legal framework. And then on the single legislative framework, this is something that comes and goes as an idea. In any case, this is not the time to put it forward, because Parliament will end its mandate in spring next year. So there's no time for such a work. So I'll leave it for the long term. Thank you.